Alright then. Tier List Part 2 for Inscriptions. Specifically for the Artefact Inscriptions and the Embers of Rage Steam Implants. Let's go. But first, before I basically jump into this, I'll note that basically I'm a normal Nightmare player. I don't really have a whole lot of experience for Insane, so don't really take this as really good a really good selection for runes and infusions basically on harder difficulties. But I do believe that if you play on Nightmare, these are the best stuff basically you get. So they're gonna work for that difficulty for sure. And I'll note basically you'll find the link for part 1 basically in the description. But other than that, let's just get to it. Alright, so I'll note basically down here we basically have a bunch of inscriptions basically to talk about. A few of these basically get dropped as common loot you basically find anywhere in a dungeon or in shops. The others are basically linked to rewards for quests, so you can only basically get the Tainted Purging here, for example, from helping Ungrow and Last Hope in the Brotherhood of Alchemist quest. The Wild Growth one here from Agrimly in the Brotherhood of Alchemist quest for his side of the potions. This one's I think is I believe the one you get basically from Angelwyn, where you basically complete the Storm of Dearth with Linelli's help. And yeah, that's basically something basically keep in mind. A few of these are basically linked to helping certain NPCs, while the others basically that one by the way is for the Temple Warning, basically helping Daikara Mountains. The other one's basically over here though. They're basically linked to being just found as just come in the ground. So that's something I basically keep in mind. Alright, so the first one I basically talk about is going to be the Primal Infusion over here. So let's go talk about it. So let's go to dropped, and we'll go with Primal Infusion. Alright, so instant use, just like all other wild infusions, because that's basically what the Primal basically is. It basically heals you for X% of all incoming damage to your character. It reduces the duration of random detrimental effects by Y each turn for 4 turns. And heal affinity and duration of random detrimental effects reduction scale with willpower. So I'll note that the Primal Infusion is sort of interesting because it basically will cause random detrimental effects to be reduced each turn in their count. But at the same time, it's not useful because you want to basically get rid of detrimental effects right away as opposed to having them on your character. And the Primal won't basically do that. It'll basically just make them go down faster, which is unfortunate. It also basically gives you a heal affinity, which is could basically make it so when you basically hit by say an acid attack, you'll basically heal for X% of that acid attack as health. So basically mitigates the amount of damage you take. But really the thing about the Primal Infusion is that it's sort of a defensive rune that basically just doesn't have a really good effect basically for it. And it's not really one I would ever suggest basically getting. What I probably would like to see from this is basically maybe have it basically will cleanse basically a random effect each turn, sort of the one of the other effects basically in the game that basically does. But as is right now, this doesn't really help you out enough. So it's basically just another F tier, so to speak. So you know what, being an artifact, let's throw it right down to the F tier because it's hard to get, and this is other stuff that is better even over here. So yeah. But one that's basically not the fret about is this one right here. And that is the Rune of Reflection. So, this is basically a shielding rune, but with a very special ability that basically reflects all damage basically inflicted upon it back on the character. So, essentially, say you take a 500 damage fireball from an Archmage basically while you get this basically on you. What the Rune of Reflection will basically do is it'll basically take that 500 damage and apply it to the damage shield. And it breaks, and breaks, and it takes health damage. But before then, let's just say it'll take 600 damage to basically break it, and you get hit by 500 damage to fireball. The 500 damage that basically came at you from the caster is going to go right back to the caster's HP pool and hit them directly as I believe untyped damage, which is very powerful. And well, there's really not a whole lot more to basically say than that. Basically, it's a damage shield that basically does extra for it. Now, there's one little caveat to it. In fact, it basically scales with magic. So if you're not basically a magic type of character, this isn't going to be as useful to you. But it's definitely a very powerful rune for basically it offers you. And if you're a magic character, you're just going to benefit immensely from for sure. I mean, there's also of course the fact that if you're silenced, you can't use it. But I think I can basically easily say this is an S tier. If you can use it, it's great. If you can't use it because you don't have magic stat, it might still be useful in the early game because it still has damage shield. So yeah, there's not a whole lot to say like it's bad. So S tier. All right, so the next one I talk about is the Mirror Image Rune. Now, the Mirror Image Rune is basically a very interesting sort of like rune that's basically added to the game recently. And at first glance, I didn't think much of it. Basically, like spawns a few images of you based on like the images that are around you, and these images will basically taunt enemies for like a little bit of time, so to speak. And what that basically means is that like enemies will basically attack like the mirror images as opposed to like you, so you're basically able to avoid being hit by like damaging attacks, unless they're like AOE and stuff like that. Um, I found that this can be useful, and sometimes like if you have like the appropriate characters, you can make like really good use of it, but at the same time, it's like not that useful. I have like here's the thing about this. I basically tried this like rune basically as like something to use like my like soul link character, so to speak. But I've also used it basically on rune at walks. I found that this rune basically works better as like maybe like a auxiliary rune for like say your golem or like rune at walks, because they'll basically use it and they'll basically have a whole lot of these like taunting like worms that walks all over the place. That basically could be anywhere really, and that could make really work well as like basically getting stuff to attack them. But I've always found like it would be so much better to like um, have some other like effect basically to like sort of protect you. As I said right here, it's basically a very hit and miss rune. I'm not really sure it could be like improved a whole lot, and it needs to be improved, but I think we'll say this is like a bottom of C tier type of like rune for what it basically offers. It does work, but sometimes it doesn't work. That's basically how it basically works in a nutshell. Oh yeah, sort of like emphasize, but basically it taunts those enemies basically around you. So what that basically means is like they'll be attacking the the images as opposed to you. So there's that, but whatever. All right, well, let's see here. So the final one I basically talk about is Prismatic Rune here. That's basically this from right here. So I'll note that the Prismatic Rune is basically sort of similar to Stormshield, except that it basically creates like blocking instances for like separate damage types. One for fire, lightning, cold, acid, mine, arcane, blight, nature, temporal, light, and darkness, and physical, of course, as well. And these wards are basically going to grant you like um, essentially like damage prevention for like incoming sources. So if say like a fireball basically hits you in the face, it'll basically prevent that like fireball from basically hitting you in the face. Um, Now this is a pretty powerful rune, but at the same time it's also very like hit and miss as well, because unlike with Stormshield, it's not going to basically stop like incoming damage from like affecting like each charge. So say you have like 5 charges of like fire, if you're basically like hit by like fireball, it basically causes burn damage. You'll basically take that first initial hit from the fireball, but then the subsequent hits from like the fireball are basically gonna like keep going down for like each tick. So you get burned for like turn 2, it goes down a tick. You go burn for turn 3, it goes down a tick. And this doesn't account for the fact that you might be being hit for like more fire damage in the process, so it can go down really fast. It is a very powerful like effect of like being hit by like stable attacks, but then that rarely basically happens in this game. So it really depends like what your damage resistance are like, what the incoming damage is like. It's very like hit and miss. It does like some interesting stuff, but would I ever like consider like using it over like some of his other stuff here? Probably not. I mean, it's better than like this stuff up here, but not by a whole lot. All right, so that's basically all like to drop like artifact inscriptions. A very good one up here, a mildly good one over here, and then these ones are a little bit like down here, so to speak. But then we get to like some of the ones that are basically rewarded to you, and they're a little bit different. So the first one to basically talk about is basically the Wild Growth Infusion that you basically get from helping Grimly. So let's just bring this up here for a moment. And we'll just go up to here. So I'll note that when you basically help like Ungrel of Last Hope or Ingrimly of the Hermit, you'll basically get access to like the Taint of like Purging here, or like the Infusion of Wild Growth, where you basically get them their last potion. So that's basically what we're going to talk about next, and that's basically listed down here. So the Wild Growth Infusion. What this basically does is it's basically an instant use infusion that'll basically offensively pin enemies to the ground for 5 turns and cause them nature and physical damage. All while basically giving you an increase in armor and armor hardness for like a little bit as well. It scales with your willpower, but I'll note this is very like interesting case of an infusion that like I'm not really sure who it's basically aimed at. it could be good for mages, I guess, in that it can basically lock down like your approaching characters, or it could be good for like a melee character that's basically like wants to wear a storm like hits from like melee characters, I guess, as well. But the thing about like Wild Growth is that it basically is like catering to like physical threats as opposed to like magical ones, and I really don't say, as I said this basically before, it's really not the physical threats that are probably going to kill you in this game. It's the magical ones. So the thing about the Wild Growth Infusion is that it's very interesting, but at the same time, it's like it doesn't really serve a purpose basically for your lineup of like inscriptions. So whatever is replace one of the other inscriptions with it, probably not. So I think it's probably another reason like Infusion like, could use a rework maybe. So F tier is where I'm going to for that one. All right, the one that basically comes after that is basically the Purging Taint. Now, note, this entry may be incorrect because the information is secondhand. And I basically had that basically written there for one reason. I never actually used the Purging Taint in the game just yet. The thing about the Purging Taint is that it requires you basically to help Ungrel. And you basically have to get him like the last potion. And the thing is you might not be able to help Ungrel because you might have like an alchemist basically complete his potions first. You might decide you want to get specific reward from another alchemist instead, like say the invulnerability and potion you basically get from Elvia, I believe it is. Let's see here. And yeah, basically elixir of vulnerability from Elvia if you basically help them. This is so much better than all this stuff combined, by the way, just to throw it out there, but whatever. The thing is, the Purging Taint is basically something I never actually used, but from what I basically see here, it looks like it's kind of interesting. So basically, it takes a turn to use, and while it's basically active, this Taint will basically remove a physical detrimental effect for you each turn, and basically increase the duration of Purging Taint by 1 when a physical detrimental effect is basically purged. So the idea of this is basically sort of like a Spine of a World type of talent that basically will basically help alleviate physical detrimental effects on you, and that's nothing to scoff at. I think if it actually works like that. If it does work like that, indeed, then I have to say it's probably worth considering as a good talent base to consider. But at the same time, it's also hard to get, I guess we'll say, is the least. And would I prefer to maybe just wipe all the current detrimental effects that basically at hand all at once? Then that might be as good as well. Would I say is good? I'm not really sure, but it's definitely better than a lot of the other stuff is basically listed here, I think, as well. So let's just say the Purging Taint is probably probably around here, I think, in C tier. I'll actually try this in the future, and this may change in the ranking at some point as well, but we'll see about that in the future, perhaps. Alright, so that's basically the the two you basically get from the Alchemist. The other two you basically get from complete quests basically in the instance for the Rune of Return you basically get from, or Rune of Rift you basically get from helping the Temporal Warden basically in Daikara, and then the Rune of Dissipation basically helps you in everything, so to speak. But anyways, the Rune of Rift. So that's basically this one right here. The Rune of Rift is basically a one turn to use that basically inflicts a massive amount of temporal damage on a target if it basically fails to resist its save against your attack, and it'll basically send a target 4 turns into the future. And it'll also reduce your paradox by 25 if you have any to reduce. So basically, the idea of this rune is basically renews an actor for 4 turns, which is very, very powerful. But it's also one that basically requires you actually hit the target basically for it to work. So if you basically hit say a rare and make a save, then they're basically still going to be there in your face, and you haven't got rid of them. And that's kind of bad if you want to basically use it for defensive purposes. Is the idea. So now where this basically works really well is that if you basically are in the early game, a lot of stuff isn't actually going to basically resist these saves. So you're basically going to you could use it there. But outside of that, it's basically not that great in the later game. So I mean, you probably want to basically plan for the later game as opposed to the early game. And that's basically when you're probably going to be getting it as well. Well, actually, the Rune of Reflection one you actually could get in the early game, so I shouldn't say that because you could use it early game, but would you? I probably wouldn't recommend it. Honestly, it's probably just in our F tier, I think. I mean, it's possible it could make it so you could cast on yourself and put yourself out for 4 turns to take your 4 turns basically to recover from a fight, perhaps. But it needs to be improved in some way, I think. Alright, and then we get finally to the one you get from Linene, from Angolan. The Rune of Dissipation. So, this takes 1 turn to use, and you can basically select an enemy yourself. If you select an enemy, you basically remove 8 beneficial magical effects from them, or if you target yourself, you'll basically remove 8 detrimental magical effects from yourself. It's got a fixed range of 10 and a cooldown of 18. Now, this is basically what a rune I basically consider to be a head scratcher. There are situations in this game where, it can be very beneficial to basically remove the magical sustains from an enemy. Probably the best example would probably be the final boss from Tempest Peak, when you basically get to the very end of the game. You basically cast this on either of the final bosses and wipe out their sustains to make them a lot weaker to basically fight. But any other instance is basically really up to your understanding of the game to really know how basically good it is. It can be very good against some uniques and bosses like that. The Master is one I basically heard is pretty good against. I know it's fairly good against other vampires and vampire lords and Dreadful as well. But if you actually don't know where it's basically that beneficial, then it might be better basically to have something else basically as a result. But for more industrious players who basically know what they're basically doing with it, it can be very powerful. So I will say that. I mean, compared to the other stuff, it's probably a B tier, maybe upper B tier type of infusion. I mean, I probably wouldn't take it over say some of this other stuff that I basically need to have this stuff basically covered as well. But if you can save this for the end game, it can be very profitable to use against the final bosses for sure. All right, so that's basically all the Maj'Eyal runes basically can cover here. There is technically this one that covers well, I think, the Devourer Taint, but let's just get through the EOR stuff here first, and then we'll get to this one right at the end as a sort of Easter egg sort of thing. So we'll cover this, and then we'll get down here to the Tinker equipment. So EOR Steamtech Inscriptions. Now, I'll note that there's basically two implants in this game: the Steam Generator and the Medical Injector, and they basically work very distinctly. So the Steam Generator is basically sort of the mana Surge Rune that I basically covered over here, and it basically works for a Tinker class, and that basically gives you Steam power generation each turn, and it'll basically give you a boost of Steam if you basically need it at any given juncture, so to speak. And for the Saw Butcher, the Side Shot, and the Gunslinger is basically essential for it to basically work. So there's that basically considered. So probably another C tier one basically over here, so to speak. Probably even more beneficial than this one, because on some Master's mana related classes they can actually make use of the Master's Rune or not, but you definitely need to have a Steamtech Steam Generator for sure. The Steam Generator, it's basically one of those one of those inscriptions that you really have to basically understand basically how it works. You need to basically have your resources basically managing the EOR campaign by a lot. So sometimes you may have even one or even two Steam Generators basically to keep your map or resources basically up to basically use your talents. And you basically have to get that from Steam Generators because I don't think there's any specific talents that basically help you in that sort of regard. Basically, it's an essential inscription to basically have for those characters, and it really sucks for them because it takes away from their other inscription slots. But you know what? There's actually something to say that's sort of bad about this. A lot of Steam Generators are actually really low in what they basically generate to you. So not until you get to the late game are they really at that point where you can basically sort of make use of this one. Early game for EOR, you basically have to have two Steam Generators at once to sort of work with them. If you have just one, you'll basically run out of Steam pretty fast. But if you have two, you can sort of All right, I'm sort of rambling here a little bit, but Steam Generators. Early game in EOR, you need to have usually at least two of them because you don't generate enough Steam from one to sort of keep your talents basically going. And late game, you can usually make use of this one, but you have to find a really good one for it to basically work. And the thing about the Steam Generators that basically take away from your other inscriptions you could be using, so there's that to basically here as well. You know what? I'm actually gonna say this actually bomb C tier because you do need it, but it's basically one of those ones that could be improved to be a little bit more Gusco in the early game, I think. Maybe have some other effects basically associated with as well. All right, so that's basically Steam area in a nutshell. The other one basically to talk about is Medical Injector here, and it's a very different one to say the least. So I'll note that the medical injector will basically allow you to use therapeutics, and those are basically all this stuff basically over here. And essentially, like, this is basically sort of like, a combination of like several like, inscriptions all in one, so to speak, just like, the, inscription slot right here. So let's just talk about like, a little bit after basically we like, talk to the stuff right here, I guess. And we'll go to medical salves down here, I guess, so we'll talk about them first. So, medical salves. Medical salves are basically stuff you basically craft with the creates Tinker Steel in like the Embers of Rage campaign, and to basically give actually to like, some really powerful effects. These can include the Frost Salve, the Water Salve, the Fiery Salve, and the Healing Salve, Pain Suppressor Salve, and Unstoppable Force Salve. And what these salves basically allow you to basically do is you can actually like use them to like, remove like specific like detrimental effects or mental effects, magical effects. You can use them to sort of like heal yourself up, like, a healing fusion without like, cut, poison, and like, disease removal. And you can also use them to like reduce damage and increment you as well, if you want. So, kind of like a wild infusion, so to speak. Basically, the medical injector is sort of like, a combination of like, all your like other inscription slots into like one like, package. They're all a bit weaker, I guess, than like, the other stuff basically you can talk about, but they're all like, it's basically like, having the right tools basically at the right time, so to speak. So you basically have a specific like, ability to basically use them for like that, specific purpose you basically want to like use them for. There is some detriments to like, medical salves, and you basically have to craft them. So you can't really find like good medical salves. You have to basically make them yourself, which can be a little bit difficult to basically do if like you don't understand how the creation talents basically work. But at the same time, like if you basically get them like to work for you, it basically works really well. So let's just see here. I think I'm gonna say like the medical injector for what it's basically worth is actually really like really good talent. So or prodigy, so or inscription. It's not as good as basically like the ones like old up here, but I mean, I think it's basically a solid B tier. So let's just throw it up here. And should we talk about this stuff as well? I don't think I'm going to throw this basically into the list up here, but we'll basically talk about individually what these basically all do for you. So we basically get those basically covered for you. So start with like the status cure, like salves basically here. We have Frost Salve, and basically the idea of like these different salves by the way is like the Frost Salve basically remove like detrimental effects from you, and grant you a Frost Aura. It basically gives you like cold, darkness, and nature affinity. So basically the idea of like the Frost Salve is it basically like lets you basically like remove a physical detrimental effect. And you're basically taking like cold, darkness, or nature affinity, basically like can absorb like that damage basically towards you and like remove it, so to speak, which is nice. And then basically put your medical injector on cooldown for Y times 25 turns. And that's something I know about the salves as well, by the way. If I go down to like the life management one, so notice that like this puts your cooldown basically on Y times 15 turns. The pain suppressor basically put it down for like Y by 10 turns. The unstoppable force salve basically put like on cooldown for N plus 1 turns, basically. So basically you'll get like a different like amount of like duration for like the cooldowns depending on what salves you basically use. So that's something I basically keep in mind. But yeah, basically the idea of like each of these salves is like Frost basically removes physical effects, which are basically of course like very detrimental to you basically early on in the Embers of Rage campaign, and even like in like the original Age of Ascendancy campaign is still going to be very powerful. Water Salve basically is like Blight, Mine, and Acid affinity here, and it removes like mental effects. And Fire Salve basically moves like fire, light, and lightning affinity, so for you for like magical effects. Now I really have to really like state this as well because you can basically pick what you basically want to remove here. This makes it like very powerful compared to say like a wild infusion, and to some extent also to, like the Shower Afflictions rune as well, but yeah, not really as well because Shower Affliction basically removes like everything, so to speak. But the thing about like the medical like injectors is that like because you can basically like sort of remove like specifically like detrimental effects basically from you, you can basically like use your medical injector for that purpose. And like if you basically have like 2 medical injectors because you can't have 2 of these inscriptions, you can save like the other one for like some other purpose. So let's say you're basically in a fight and you have like 2 medical injectors, a move infusion. We'll say you have a regeneration infusion and like let's say a Shower Afflictions run, and you're basically playing a boss that basically like goes really happy on like detrimental effects. If you need to, you could technically use both your medical injectors to basically remove detrimental effects for you. Use your Shadow's Fixing Rune for purpose as well. So basically, like, get rid of like nasty detrimental effects, so you basically help yourself out. And then you basically save your Move Infusion for like getting away or getting up close, and your Regeneration Infusion for like healing up. On another hand, perhaps you're like up against like really tough bosses, a whole lot of damage physically up front. You can use like a pain suppressor, like solid basically to deserve like reduce incoming damage. If you need to, you can basically use the Regeneration Infusion and like a healing salve, basically keep yourself basically up. And again, you can use like the Move Infusion to like move like specific detrimental effects or like run away. So it basically gives you like the luxury of like being able to sort of like plan out your attack and like revolve around like different situations that basically may pop up, which is what makes this like very very good for what it basically does. And yeah, I'll basically go down to like life management down here. So healing salve basically heals you up for like a certain amount of like HP. So the more like medical injector basically helps you, like if it basically has like a very high like what is it basically if it has a very like high efficiency, then it's basically gonna help you a lot more with healing. So if you have like say like 2% efficiency, it'll basically heal like, you for like 2% of like what the healing like salve basically let you do, and it'll basically put you on like a cooldown for like whatever amount of turns. That's actually something to note about the medical injectors by the way in this game. By the way, usually they have very high efficiency and high cooldowns, or they have very low efficiency and low cooldowns. So you can basically like basically get the best of your medical injectors for what your basic purpose you basically need them for. And you can also select what medical injectors basically use first as well if you have like two different ones on your character. So is that too? There's basically a lot to like about like the medical injector. So it's definitely like an A class like inscription basically to get your character to basically use if you need it. And by the way, down here in Supple 4 Salve, you have something that basically gives you like increased healing modifier of like 250%. So yeah, I guess like say that boss that hurts you a lot, if you put like this on and put a Regeneration Infusion on, you're healing for a lot each turn. If you basically keep like detrimental like effects to basically stop you from healing, your healing up from like above 0% on you. So yeah, there's basically a lot to like basically about like medical injectors and all that stuff. All right, we'll basically ignore basically like Fronies basically up here. They're basically all of a different purpose. So they're basically all part of the medical injectors, and they're basically all like do their work pretty well. You know what? Let's throw this basically up to A tier up here, and I'll throw basically ahead of like Shadow Reflections because it is really good like injector pro basically offers. All right, so I suppose the only thing I really cover is basically this like taint right here, and that specific taint is basically called Devourer. Now this taint is basically only found on the Withering Beast, basically in like the sunken like fortress in Lake of Nur. So you'll never actually be able to acquire this ability, but it's basically one of the things that makes the Withering Beast really unique. When he basically uses this like taint by the way, he'll basically remove like X effects from you and basically heal you, heal himself for like for each like effect. So basically, say you have like regeneration or like other stuff like that basically on your character. If he basically uses this effect basically on you, he'll basically actually like up like your like his like health by that amount while basically remove it from you. So it can be very like dangerous to basically fight the ruling beast if you're not really careful for that sort of purpose. So just that basically keep in mind. But at the same time, I never really found it to be like the ruling beast be like that dangerous. Really, I found like it's like more dangerous outputs like is like damaging spells. So if you can basically like wear a dozed and like he's not really much of a threat, but this is something to basically throw out there. Would I basically rate as like something they can actually use? Probably not because like you can't actually use it. But if you could actually use this yourself, then like it could be like a very powerful way of like dealing with like really powerful effects on an enemy. It's actually probably like a tint that actually could be used like in the game itself, or whatever. All right, so that's basically all the inscriptions you basically use in this game. Not really a whole lot more I'm gonna say than that. And I still have time here, so I'm actually just gonna quickly just like make a list here again. So let's just go to my account. We're just gonna go use my other stuff here. So let's go. And again, this is for like 1.74 and like Tales of Maj'Eyal campaign. So blah blah. There we go. Let's get this, and let's go inscriptions. So rating inscriptions in 1.7.4. Alright, so there we go. That's basically what it is. They hit the wrong thing here. I put download instead of save, I guess. Well, that's unfortunate, but oh well. Or maybe you can't save because it basically adds stuff to it. That could be as well. Oh, there is the save thing. So
At Best Buy, you can turn the joy of finding the perfect gift into the joy of giving the perfect gift.
ads suck, by the way. But they're a thing. Just have to deal with it. So bringing the inscriptions basically in 1.74 here. And, DFuxa rates. Alright, now, before I basically, tune off, basically for, this specific, tier list here. I'll note basically I was actually thinking a little bit about... Oh, it doesn't actually show my blink one here, by the way. That's unfortunate. So yeah, note by the way, like my other tier list, basically, I had that blink thing here, but I guess, it doesn't include it, so... Oh, well, that's unfortunate. Well, that's unfortunate. Basically, it doesn't include, the control phase star because they didn't actually have the appropriate, picture for it. Well, or it'll consider this basically, her blink, rune basically down here is, still crappy, so... I'll throw that basically down D tier because that's basically where it was. So that's why I was basically wasn't saving, by the way, because I basically added an image to it so you actually couldn't see it. So, oh well. Let's just save this again, I guess. So, inscriptions, and then do that. Inscriptions. I'll also delete the, don't want to basically lax the other stuff here. So, is it this one? Yes, this one. So, we're just going to delete this tier list. Alright, so, now that it's basically all the way, I actually thought a little bit about, how I basically ranked these prodigies last time. And I'll note basically one of the things I basically did was I put, the range, amplification device basically up here in B tier. But I actually took some time to think about it, and I actually think that, this is not really a good place to put this, because there's something up here. When you're basically grabbing prodigies, the main thing about them is that you want to basically use them to, help with, surviving, big boss fights and stuff like that. And you're probably not going to use this basically on a boss all that much, this one right here. So, it's sort of like, a gimmick key that's basically not very powerful and basically consider it for that purpose. This is probably a D tier talent, so I actually probably could move this down, I think, is what I'm probably going to do. So, we're going to go back, basically here, we'll just, re-rank this, be a little bit lower. We're basically ahead of, Gargoyle's Revenge. It sounds like a good idea on paper, but the thing is, you're not really using it as bosses, and that's basically where you want to use these projects basically for, so... I mean, that's the one problem of it, right? It needs to be used on the bosses, and it's just not used for that purpose. So, yeah. So, save, DFuxa rates, as that right there. We'll make this again, save. So, that's basically new, Prodigy's tier list basically update with, just being a little bit lower. Maybe I'll update this more as we go along, because, there's some stuff in here that basically should be dropped down, perhaps, or raised up, perhaps. I'll admit that myself. I mean, I may have put, cars a little bit too high, but, it's definitely still a good talent that, is on F tier, for example, but whatever. Again, let's just go back in here. I'm just going to quickly just, delete the old one right here. And I'll look, by the way, besides, these Tales of Maj'Eyal, Tales of basically did ones for, a lot of the CNC games, so I want to check those out. Dark Reign, the first one. But other than that, that's basically it for this tier list. Hope you guys basically enjoyed it, and take care.